have 7 senators in our delegation. 1 senator is making this decision. 1. He represents 10% of the Gwinnett population. We are a population of 1 million.
Internal fight between opposing parties in the Gwinnett County Legislative Delegation makes it to the Senate floor with a vote on nonpartisan school boards today. Good evening and welcome to Lawmakers on this 10th day of the legislative session. I'm Donna Lowry. We're now a quarter of the way into the 40-day session, and the number of bills under consideration continues to stack up. We'll have more on the Gwinnett County program in a moment. That area's contentious issues began bubbling up actually during the redistricting process last fall and continues as counties set new boundaries during the session. Cobb County is dealing with similar issues in the county when it comes to cityhood and new maps. 2 lawmakers will join us. Also tonight, we're going to talk about criminal justice and prisons with 2 former prosecutors, one now in the House and one in the Senate. But first, we head to Capitol correspondent Brenda Waters, who's at the Gold Dome. Brenda.
Hey, Donna, how are you?
Good.
Well, you know, today is Groundhog Day. And this morning, Georgia's groundhog, General Beauregard Lee, predicted an early spring for the Peach State. But our intrepid executive producer predicts another 8 weeks of contention over Gwinnett County's district and school maps. Well, today, Senate Bill 369, which would make school board commissioner elections nonpartisan, came up for a vote in the Senate. The vote was 32-21 in favor of SB 369, which takes effect for this year's school board elections in Gwinnett County.
I care about nonpartisan school board because students should be the focus and not partisan politics. The bottom line is partisanship should have no place on our school board and in our schools. The students and their education should be the only priority.
Some see making school board elections nonpartisan in the state's largest school district as a Republican power play, overriding the opposition of the mostly Democratic lawmakers representing Gwinnett.
We have 7 senators in our delegation. 1 senator is making this decision. 1. He represents 10% of the Gwinnett population. We are a population of 1 million. 10%. And unless he can prove to us or show us some type of survey, some type of document that he has of those who are in favor, I would love to see that because, again, he never went through our delegation with that information.
The reason I stand against this bill is because SB 369 did not pass through the delegation, nor has it been widely supported by the residents of Gwinnett.
Let Gwinnett people a chance. Let put in a vote, whether, in a referendum, see if they want. If Gwinnett people wants nonpartisan school board, I don't have a problem. School board member don't teach. School board member don't go to school and teach. We have a great teachers in Gwinnett County. We have a great administrator. We have a great staff. We have a lot of good folks in Gwinnett. They take care of the children. So this is kind of slap in the face.
There were 2 amendments to this bill. One amendment to hold a referendum for Gwinnett voters on the issue this September was voted down. The other amendment to this bill was thrown out because it made a local bill into a state bill, which goes against Senate rules.
Regardless of which route the local bill takes, this amendment comes back through and amends the OCGA. Therefore, it becomes a general bill, which is an out-of-order process for this chamber. So amendment number 2 is out of order.
Senator Nikki Merritt asked for a reconsideration after that vote. Meantime, in the House, legislation to prevent wrongful convictions in Georgia. Representative Bonnie Rich presented a bill to update the rules of evidence in criminal cases to match civil cases. Now, based on an old case, widespread acceptance is the only standard we have for vetting expert testimony. Rich says that lack of reliability in criminal testimony by experts has led to wrongful convictions.
This standard simply requires that scientific evidence reach only a verifiable stage of certainty without regard for reliability. Sadly, this has resulted in the use of unreliable scientific evidence, which has resulted in wrongful convictions. According to the National Registry of Exonerations, we've had 39 documented exonerations in Georgia over the last 30 years. And at least 25 of those wrongful convictions were due, at least in part, to faulty scientific evidence that was admitted under the Harper Standard. That means that 64% of our wrongful convictions have been based on faulty evidence.
House Bill 478 passed the House 138 to 25. That's my Capitol report. And Donna, I may be partisan, but I think you're the best.
Oh, I agree that I'm the best and you're the best too. Thanks, Brenda. We're going to focus our attention now on public safety and prison issues. With me are two former prosecutors, Republican Representative Chuck F. Strachan of Decula, a former assistant district attorney. He's also chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and Democratic Senator Harold Jones II of Augusta, a former Solicitor General, and he's also the Senate Democratic Whip. Welcome to Lawmakers to both of you. Hello. And I should mention that you're both on Judiciary. You're both, in addition to Judiciary, you're on Ethics in your respective chambers too. So as we get started, I want to mention the governor's proposed budget for public safety. It asks for $5,000, a $5,000 raise, I should say, for state employees, which would include law enforcement, and $7 million would pay for hiring 32 more employees for the crime lab and medical examiner, and upgrading GBI lab equipment and improving the GBI headquarters. And so, Senator Jones, thanks to the budget surplus, it's a lot, it is, but is it enough to take care of some of the problems within public safety?
It starts going in the right direction. One of the key things is, especially about the crime lab, because we've had a backlog in Augusta and other places, so that's going to be very key to we can get that evidence processed, especially like in DUI cases, because some of your misdemeanor cases have kind of had to take a back seat, so to speak, to some of the other cases because of COVID and other things. So I think it's certainly a step in the right direction where we want to go, but there are other areas we probably could still look at, but I am encouraged about that, and we always want to treat our state employees well, so by giving them also that raise, that helps too.
Yeah, there's still the turnover within law enforcement, with law enforcement officers, within the prison system, and $5,000, it's good, but is it enough?
Well, what we've seen in the budget this year is a real prioritization of public safety. I think it's important to note that with the challenges that we've seen in the Department of Corrections, that there are millions in the budget for renovation of prisons. There are increase in law enforcement salaries, a new state trooper class, a real evidence of prioritizing public safety, and that this is a statewide responsibility. And Governor Kemp's budget recommendation, I think, reflects that with the budget surplus that we have this year.
Yeah, the turnovers, it's hard to deal with that, but I guess it'll take a while for things to settle down. So let's talk specifically about prisons. You, Senator Jones, have a bill, SB 137, and it deals with banning private prisons. Tell us about that bill.
Right, so one of the principal reasons for having private prisons has been basically to deal with expenses. But if you actually look at the facts, the expenses of private prisons are actually a little bit higher than on the state level. So you have two things. The other principal reason was for overcrowding. Well, Georgia, because some of the laws that we've enacted, also because, quite frankly, because of the COVID situation, we've actually seen a 15% decrease in our prison population. So number one, we have private prisons, which actually cost more than our state prisons. And then secondly, we actually have a less of an overcrowding problem. So based upon that, it may be time now to kind of look at maybe eliminating those private prisons as far as owning prisons are concerned, as far as, actually start talking about criminal justice from more of a public standpoint than necessarily using it from a private standpoint.
Do you know how many we have in Georgia at this point?
I think we have 9 now in Georgia, yes. And it's 2 companies that basically have them, and it's basically, I think, a total of 8 or 9 that we have. It's $127 million in the governor's budget for that. That's one of the bigger line items, as a matter of fact, as far as that he has in the budget as far as dealing with prison population or criminal justice.
And you think our government can do this cheaper and more efficiently?
Well, I think one of the key things is we find all the other alternatives necessarily incarceration, because one of the things is private prisons don't necessarily take the most violent offenders. And of course, we've talked about mental health and other aspects of it. So that's one of the areas that we ought to be looking at. So it's not necessarily to just take the money and run. We're taking the money and now reallocating it to something to cover things on the front end as far as persons getting involved in the criminal justice system.
Okay. Chairman Efstration, I want to get with you on something else, and that is the vaccines for prisoners. You have a bill that would deal with that, or is it in a bill form at this point?
Well, I've been certainly tracking the vaccination rate within the state prisons, and currently 76% of prisoners have had at least one dose of the vaccine. 68% have had 2 doses. Vaccine is voluntary for the people in the prison system, but I think it's important to note that our corrections commissioner actually Timothy Ward. He had a video receiving the vaccine, which has been shared with prisoners and shared with employees in the Department of Corrections, really setting a great example. And the rate of vaccinations higher than the wider population right now. So really the Department of Corrections has a great record in that regard.
And why do you think that is in terms of, you know, they're in that small, you know, they're in these quarters where they're close together, I guess that may have a difference, make a difference in that?
The challenges facing the prison system during the COVID-19 pandemic were immense, to say the least. And I think that the leadership we've seen is really laudable, getting us through the pandemic with the records that they have. The vaccination rate, I think, is just one aspect of their great work.
Yeah, so you're looking to possibly turn that into legislation. You don't know at this point.
There are many issues right now impacting the prisons that we're going to be talking about. I think the mental health reforms that were referenced earlier and the focus on mental health is a critical aspect of that. Speaker David Ralston's legislation to comprehensively address mental health in Georgia is really exciting. 21% of Georgia's prison population currently has a diagnosed mental health condition. And when you really look at that and the impact more broadly to public safety, it is clear that we have to address that issue as part of a comprehensive answer to public safety.
And while I have you, I know you do have a bill that you're a signer on, a bipartisan mental health bill that will deal with emergency involuntary treatment for prisoners. Talk about that a little bit.
So a constituent brought this issue to me several years ago, and ultimately informing law enforcement about the important specific needs of the person who is going to be receiving treatment is helpful to make sure that what could otherwise be a very dangerous situation is de-escalated. And so a constituent of mine has worked very closely with my bipartisan co-sponsor on this legislation, and I'm very excited about this proposal this year. It's one of many bills that will be really looking to address mental health in Georgia.
Yeah, there are a lot of mental health bills out there, and so it's good to know. Let's turn to you, Senator Jones. There are a couple of bills out there that deal with solitary confinement in prison, and you're a sponsor or a signer on one of them. Mm-hmm. Talk about that.
Well, solitary confinement, one of the things you find actually can exacerbate a lot of the problems. When you're going back to that mental health aspect, when you talk about 21% of persons need that, when you have solitary confinement, it actually exacerbates whatever issues they may have, even if a person does not. And what you have is a situation where a person actually may become out worse shape than they are, or possibly more violent too, and that's also a big problem. So that's why we want to deal with that. It doesn't really deal with anything as far as safety in the prison is concerned. What it really does is actually, when you talk about solitary confinement, it really brings somebody out of solitary that's actually going to be more violent to not only their fellow inmates, but also to society.
So what would your bill do?
I think the bill, basically what we're going to try to do is basically outlaw that to some extent, but what we want to do is make sure that the punishments is not solitary confinement, but punishment, the one that's going to actually be commensurate to what the person is doing. Solitary confinement is not really punishment as far as prisons are concerned. It's basically just exasperating the issue that exists. And so we really don't need to have that. And I think that's one of the things we're looking at doing.
So you're talking about eliminating it
Right.
completely. Any alternatives for that when, you know, I guess it's used to control prisoners?
Correct. But the alternative, of course, is that the person actually is now incarcerated. They are in prison. So we're not talking about releasing a person. What we're talking about is actually finding those services necessarily that can help them. Or if there is some punishment to be dealt with, we want the Department of Corrections to be able to do that. We're just eliminating one aspect that we think actually exasperates things that are there.
Okay. Chairman Efstration, you have another bill. You're sponsoring 1134, dealing with criminal gang activity. And of course, that's been a big push by the governor, doing some focus on that, allowing prosecuting attorneys and the Attorney General to go after gangs at the same time. Where's the problem there? I guess, why would you want this?
Well, Donna, gangs continue to be a real issue for our state, and the GBI has created a special gang task force to really investigate these crimes. But what we're seeing is they're multi-jurisdictional. They have very specific challenges for law enforcement and investigation, and also they exist in our prisons. We believe that around 14,000 people in prisons have gang affiliations of some sort. What we need is prosecutors having the ability to aggressively prosecute gang members who are perpetrating violence across the state. All Georgians deserve to be safe. Attorney General Chris Carr has made this a priority, and we are going to pass House Bill 1134 this year to give prosecutors the tools on the state level to prosecute in concert with local DAs to address the gang problem.
And up until now, they've been separate, and it would make a difference because of these jurisdictional problems.
You're exactly right. Gang prosecutions currently fall to local prosecutors, whereas for, say, anti-human trafficking measures, the Attorney General is empowered by law to prosecute those offenses. We just want consistent treatment for gang prosecutions in those cases which are similar to the extent you have criminal enterprises that are working across jurisdictional lines. And we need to empower law enforcement and prosecutors. As a former felony prosecutor, I know you need the tools necessary to meet these criminal enterprises and prosecute them accordingly.
I'm surprised that hasn't come up before.
Well, it's clearly an issue. I think the funding statement that the governor's made in the budget, prioritizing public safety like he has, ensuring that the Attorney General has the tools necessary to prosecute these gang crimes, I think are very helpful. As the gangs continue to adapt and change with the laws, we have to update the laws to ensure that we can address the gang problem.
Yeah, I know that that's a concern for you too.
Absolutely. You know, we start talking about the gang issue. That's the concern that's bipartisan. We're talking about protecting citizens.
All right, then. It's always good to have both of you here.
Yes.
We talked about it. I've had you both together before.
Thank you.
You're always great. Thank you so much. I hope you come back.
Thanks for having us.
Okay. And when we return after a break, we'll talk about cityhood issues in Cobb County and more. Two legislators from that county will join the show. You're watching Lawmakers on GPB.
Cigna is a proud partner of Georgia Public Broadcasting and Georgia Lawmakers. Cigna's mission is to improve the health, well-being, and peace of mind of those we serve. More at Cigna.com to learn how you can help support your employees' physical and emotional well-being.
Lawmakers is made possible by Georgia Farm Bureau. With over 80 years of helping everyone understand the importance of agriculture in our state. After all, ag is Georgia's #1 industry. Food and fiber production represents over $74 billion in output of Georgia's strong economy. The Georgia Farm Bureau legislative team works to represent producers across Georgia at the state capitol during the session and year-round. Georgia Farm Bureau, the voice of Georgia farmers.
Georgia Humanities, connecting people and communities across Georgia to encourage conversation, education, and understanding. Find out more at www.georgiahumanities.org.
We are the Southern Environmental Law Center. At SELC, we not only take on the toughest environmental challenges, we win, forcing the removal of more than 250 million tons of toxic coal ash, defeating repeated attempts to bring offshore drilling to our coasts, and securing clean air and water protections for communities across our region. Your most powerful environmental defender is rooted right here in the South.
Well, welcome back to Lawmakers. We're going to talk about Cobb County cityhood, local redistricting issues, and more. And joining me are Democratic Representative Terry Anulowicz and Republican Representative Sharon Cooper. And welcome back to Lawmakers. I love having you ladies on. First, an update on the several bills aimed at putting a referendum on the ballot to ask voters if they want to become cities in Cobb County. The Lost Mountain and Vining cityhood bills moved forward today. House Governmental Affairs passed them out of the committee. And earlier, East Cobb cityhood passed in the House and will face a vote in the Senate. And then the Mapleton bill is still in committee. So let's start with, there's a whole lot to talk about on here, but let's start with you, Representative Anulowicz, your thoughts on the whole cityhood movement.
I love cities. So I served on the Smyrna City Council for 10 years. I came to the General Assembly with a strong background and a love for municipal government. And I know that in the state of Georgia we have a structure, and if you can check certain boxes in your community. You have a feasibility study, you meet certain requirements, then you have a sponsor in the General Assembly. You can then choose to have a referendum to determine whether or not your area will incorporate and become a city. I have no opposition to that whatsoever. I do feel like it's important, though, for when this process is happening, for every resident who will be voting on this to go into this process with their eyes wide open and to really understand all of the nuances and all of what you're taking on. A city is so much more than code enforcement. It's so much more than zoning, and there are a lot of issues that I'm seeing with some of these cities taking on. And I just want to make sure, as we're having these conversations in the General Assembly, that all of the questions are being answered and all of the potential issues are being addressed, so that when the residents do have the opportunity to vote on this, they know exactly what they're voting for.
And you were on the city council in Smyrna, so you understand cities, and you're just saying that there are a lot more issues than people are aware of.
Right. Like I would see it when I ran for city council and when my colleagues would run for city council, and you might run because there's one or two issues that are so important to you, and you get onto this and you realize, okay, you're dealing with those one or two issues, but you're also dealing with, employee pensions, employee salaries, benefits packages, all of the different things that you're going to be doing. And Smyrna is what I describe as a legacy city. Smyrna turns 150 years old this year. It's been around for a long time. And it has, police, fire, roads, sewer, water, parks, public safety, fire department, a library. It has a whole range of services. Most of the new cities that have come online in recent years do not offer all of those services. And so it's a little bit inaccurate if someone says, well, why shouldn't everyone else be able to live in a city like Smyrna? Well, they won't ever live in a city like Smyrna because none of these new cities offer that whole array of services. So I think that's something that we need to be clear about also.
All right, Chairman Cooper, you are a signer on the East Cobb Cityhood Bill. So tell me, why do you want it to do that?
Well, I am a signer, and I signed it because, like Terry, state law says that if a group of citizens want to propose a new city, that if they follow certain things like having the feasibility study, and it goes through the legislature and is approved, that they have the right for it to be put on a ballot. It's the citizens who are going to live in that district who decides. And the reason I signed it is because I believe the citizens that would live in the proposed city have a right to determine their own destiny and decide whether they want the city or not. But I agree with Terry. They need to be well informed. And so healthcare is my issue.
No.
I've got the big mental health bill to deal with. And so I really have sat back. I signed on because I want people to be able to vote if they want it or not. But I have to say I've been disappointed by a lot of the information that's not clear that's being put out. I mean, information like you'll have to change all of your deeds with the new city on it. That's not true. And I've also been upset a little bit, or discouraged, I guess, about how the side that is against it doesn't want the other side to even have a chance to vote on it. It's like, we've decided we're against it, so if we've decided we're against it, that should be it. But it's sort of like the country these days. It's that kind of division. And so it's going to be up to the people who are pushing the city to get their message out and to show the citizens why they should vote for it. And it's going to be up to the groups that are against it to put out their information of why someone should not vote against it. I have one vote. I trust the people of East Cobb. They are very smart. I believe they'll do their due diligence in looking at this, and whatever decision they go with, I'm going to be okay with.
Yeah. So you're just waiting to see what happens with that and allow them to have the vote.
That's it.
So why isn't that okay? Just to at least put it before them and say, here's all the information.
Because, well, my hesitation with the City of East Cobb specifically is I feel like during the committee process, during the hearing process, a lot of questions were not, as far as I felt, were not adequately answered. One of the things that concerned me was that the entire system of government for the city changed dramatically during the hearing process. The original bill that went before the Governmental Affairs Committee was going to have a city that was structured unlike any other city in Cobb County and any other city in Metro Atlanta, in that you were going to have 6 city council members, all of whom were elected at large. 3 of them would have to live in their district, but 3 of them wouldn't. They would all be elected at large. So you could potentially have a supermajority of 4 council members who all lived on the same street. And I don't think that's the kind of representative government that people thought that they were going to be getting with these cops. So again, we had between the week and a half between when this bill went for its governmental affairs hearing and when it went to the floor for a vote, there was a complete overhaul of how the city was going to be structured. I still have a couple of questions about the semantics of the bill, of how, is it really doing what people think it's doing? I still think there are some things that are going to need to be clarified as the bill works through the Senate. So that was one of my big problems. My other, I had a question wondering, just why did they want the services they wanted? Why, what was the intent? And, again, I have other questions. I have questions, does it have the tax base to support it? The feasibility study says it is, but the boundaries of the city have changed since the feasibility study was originally done. So, these are all questions that, again, like Chairman Cooper said, the voters are ultimately going to be the ones who have to decide for themselves if this is what they want. But I felt that a lot of questions that should have been better clarified during the legislative process, which is our job to do, weren't as clarified as I wanted to see.
But that's part of the process. It's going through it.
It is part of the process, and there is a updated feasibility study. People can go to eastcobbga.com, and I have the feasibility study. This is the updated version that is on their website. Like one of the questions that I got was, it doesn't show anything for a city manager, and how about their retirement?
Yes.
It's on page 16. Okay. So in this updated feasibility study. And we can't, and not me, because I wasn't involved in it, I wasn't at the meeting, but they did realize that people could be elected, too many people could be elected from the same area. Mm-hmm. So they did what we do in the legislative process. We amend bills. And so they amended it so that no more than 2 could come from the same area. They all have to be elected city-wise, and the mayor will not be elected by the council, but will be elected by the people. And so the bill was improved, and that's what we do on all bills that are coming through. But people need to go to their website. They need to ask questions. They need to listen to both sides of the issue. But like on the website, there's been questions about the fire department and whether we would keep the rating. I called Smyrna this afternoon on my way here and said, what's your rating? And they said an 02. And that is what is predicted for East Cobb. And some people are feeling like, that we won't have good fire coverage if it's a city, but that's not the way it is. Fire companies have reciprocal agreements, and we're sitting right next to Sandy Springs, and I'm sure that they would have a reciprocal thing. So it's the process. They always say you don't want to watch sausage being made or legislation, and it can be messy, like Terry says.
It's kind of the same process.
It is.
So even with becoming a city, it sounds like a simple process, but it really isn't.
No, and that's when you become a city, again, you almost have to, make sure this is what the voters will have to decide. With all of the cities that we're talking about in Cobb County, are you sure this is what you really want? Because it's not ever going to be just planning and zoning. It won't ever just be parks. It's going to be, again, all of the, retiree benefits, the health insurance, all of those things you need to do. Cities are not inexpensive. And I know, I haven't participated in buying a fire truck in probably close to 8 or 9 years, but the last time I did, the truck was $1 million. Equipping it was about $360,000. And then you had to hire the firefighters and do their benefits packages and train them up and everything else. I mean, it's real money. And it is, again, I think people just need to have their eyes wide open. And the onus is on us during the legislative process to make sure we suss out any potential unintended consequences and make sure all of the questions are answered.
Well, we know that other counties have gone through this, DeKalb, Fulton, certainly, to name a few.
And their cities are doing well. I mean, I think there's been 10 in those cities over the past few years, and they're all functioning well. There's sitting close to East Cobb is Milton, Johns Creek, and Sandy Springs, and the people seem satisfied and with what they decided to do. So here again,
we're going to find out.
And don't forget Mapleton.
Mapleton. We're going to see what happens with that.
Wants to also be on the ballot
and
too.
I think they're getting their hearing next week.
Well, we're going to find out more. I want to thank you both for being here. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I want to thank you for joining us tonight for Lawmakers, and join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter at GPB News. And we're using the hashtag GPB Lawmakers. Also, don't forget to tune in tomorrow at 9 a.m. for Political Rewind. We'll see you again tomorrow. Legislative Day 11.